Afternoon, Tim. How are you?
Afternoon, Shabbar. I'm very good. Yeah, had a holiday, very
You have.
refreshed. Yeah, yeah. How are you doing?
I'm very well. I'm looking forward to my holiday in a couple of weeks, but still feels a bit too far to be getting too excited. Yeah, looking forward to that. But before I go on my holiday, we want to continue last episode's conversation, which we said was going to be a bit of a two-parter, where we started diving into how we relate to our parents' money story and the things that we picked up from childhood, even going into sort of adulthood, on how our parents did money. And there were a few things that we observed, like there could be a particular sort of traumatic event that kind of shaped us in how we then end up doing money, or there could be that sort of like just underlying kind of chronic way in which our parents might have interacted with money, which then also shapes our beliefs and behaviors around money. And so this week we're going to sort of flip it, and we're going to look at sort of like the opposite in terms of, as parents, how do we show up with money and trying to shape our kids? So yeah, that's what we're going to dive into this week.
Great. So it's the other side, yeah. So last time we looked at how we are shaped by, we could say, our parents or events when we're children around money or about money, and now we're going to flip it. So if you're a parent listening to this, but also if you're not a parent, maybe you're an uncle or an aunt, or you just interact with children in different ways, from this point of work where we're talking about a life path, what are life path centered ways of educating or socializing or influencing children around money? And whether we can do that at all is an interesting question. So where should we start, Shaba?
Well, I guess sort of like the thing that always sort of jumps out at me is, oh, how do you do this right? What's the right way to do it? I'm always looking for the golden ticket kind of thing to doing this. And slowly what I'm learning, that there probably isn't a right or a wrong way, but there's going to be a way which kind of almost like honors the individuality of your children, in this sort of conversation, that everyone does money differently. And it's also about being conscious and unconscious in how we're acting out. So I guess, why don't we start with what are sort of like the conventional ways that this
Mm.
shows up? Because you would have seen quite a few. I've had a few conversations with parents around money. Maybe we can then dive into how we each sort of do money with our children, and take it from there.
Yeah, you're right, because even when you said in your check-in, every child's different, and how do you respect their individuality? Even that, I would say, is coming from a fairly evolved perspective. Like, you're someone who's done a lot of the money work, you've reflected deeply. So you're asking what are the more conventional ways? It comes up a lot on the workshops. Often it's not the presenting issue, so people don't tend to come on a workshop and go, how do I deal with my kids? But it does come up once they start to think differently about money and realize largely we're in a very confused, deluded, unhealthy money atmosphere. People go, oh my God, what am I doing to my kids? Or how do I deal with that? I would say the conventional ones, and please chip in because you work around this as well in a different way. There's quite a lot now starting to happen in schools about financial education. Lots of banks now sponsor different programs about financial literacy. And if we just take that as a first point, what they're really doing is trying to train people to fully accept the current industrial money story, right?
Yeah.
What they're trying to do, and I don't mean they're evil or bad, because most people are living with what we've on this podcast called the current paradigm or the industrial money centered story. Most people, apart from the wonderful people who regularly listen to this podcast, but the other 8.5 billion, they're in this world where you need to organize and sort out money because that's the key to the life you want. So, of course, lots of people are trying to teach kids, whether it's parents or through school, how to have savings, how to put some money away to saving when you're a bit older, how to invest, what a budget is, all of these things. And I want to say, before I go much further, I want to say that's probably good, right? It's probably good. Although it's transmitting a very confused, unhealthy money paradigm. And on this podcast, we want to go further. all things being equal, it's good that people know how to use a bank and how to add up their money. And if it gives them more chance of not getting into debt by mistake, and if it helps them even understand the idea of savings, that's all good. So that's one conventional thing. Of course, we can go further. And then what you get, which is more personal, it comes up a lot on workshops, is people have their very own things that they do with their kids around money. And very often that's bound up in their own money dance. It might be stuff that their parents did to them, so they assume it's normal, or it might reflect their hopes and fears in life. So, for example, some people will only give money when kids do chores, right? They'll say,
Mm,
well, no, you need to learn that you have to work to get your money, you have to earn money. That's
mm,
one message. Other people will do the opposite and say, no, no, I want my children to really know they're supported and loved, so I will give them money without doing chores. And that's a different message they think they're transmitting. Some people, generally, people don't have a lot of money conversations consciously in the family, but some people will say, no, well, I want my children to think about all the people who don't have money. I want my children to know the price of stuff. Others will say, no, I don't want them to have to worry about that stuff. So there's a tremendous amount of variety in a
yeah,
normal setting. So I would say you've got financial education at school and through banks and stuff. And then you've got parents doing their best to transmit whichever messages they think are the most
yeah,
important. And I'll add a final step to that, which is, of course, most of how we actually influence our children around money is totally unconscious. And we'll come on to this, I think,
yeah,
later. In other words, the most powerful messages we send to our young people is not really what we tell them, but
yeah.
how we live our lives. And so there's a whole area there that we're probably not aware of that is influencing them too.
Yeah, my brain is sort of firing as soon as you were mentioning all of those different things. Firstly, financial advisor here that goes and delivers talks to kids around money. And even the professional body that I belong to has a whole sort of curriculum on how you can present future finances and different topics to kids. And I've done that for the last several years, for sort of the age of sort of 15, 16 year olds at my mosque,
Okay.
um, and going in and speaking to the kids. With my own kids, I've got a very kind of like just follow my way. I'm really good at budgeting. I've got the app. I know how to use it. I'm a certified, money coach. Like honestly, you just got to follow what I'm saying, and it just pains me that that they haven't adopted the budgeting app that I use. I've done like sessions with them. I've talked about it, and it's so frustrating to think that they're happy just doing what they're doing, and they're not following dad's strict money process. I was just chuckling because there is that kind of feeling of just do it my way because my way works. My
Well,
way my way's best.
yes. Well, we can dive into that, but I think that's a whole other episode, right? Although let's step back a bit. Most parents believe that whatever they are consciously transmitting
Yeah,
to their children, sorry,
yeah,
is best.
yeah,
So we've acknowledged that most of what we actually transmit isn't what we say, it's what we do.
yeah,
But nevertheless, whether you're saying you've got to earn money or you don't have to earn money or you should care about money or not care, we tend to think what we're doing is right. So that's an interesting assumption. Of course, what we're doing, as we discussed on this podcast in most episodes, is just a sort of ramshackle, random, largely unhelpful bunch of stuff we've just absorbed from our own culture, psychology, and parents.
mm,
So, what makes you think you've got it sorted? And the question there for any parent would be, are you really living the life you want? Because if you're transmitting how you think your children should be, if you think they should listen to you, you need to ask yourself the question, well, am I living the life I want? Because
mm,
if I am, then maybe they really should listen to me.
yeah,
But if I'm not, or I'm still feeling blocked or scared or
Mm.
you know, afraid of this, that, and the other, then why should they listen to me? Maybe there's a much better way of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that that side of the coin. Um, but yeah, it's true. I do get, personally, I get quite hung up on my budgeting hat just because I'm naturally very pro budget,
Mm,
and organizing and structuring money. Um, and I've moved to a place where it's now conscious, and the reason why is because it just allows me more clarity over
mm,
using my money in the areas that I would like to use it, and I feel that that structure allows me to do that. So I think when I'm trying to sort of pass that on, I think what I'm trying to do, but maybe not doing it in as a sort of loving way, is
mm.
just look, here is an option that works for me,
Yeah.
and you might want to adopt it, and the reason being is because XYZ.
Well, that sounds so lovely, but there's a little clue there, which is your frustration when they don't. Because if I'm really offering with love,
Yeah,
hey, this is what works for
yeah,
me. This is how it seems to me. This is how I do it, and it works. And take it or leave it. And if they go, nah, sorry, Dad, that's not for me.
yeah,
If I'm frustrated, there's something else going on.
yeah.
But let's not dive into your process. Let's use
No,
that. People listening will also, I hope, be recognizing some of the stuff they're passing on to their own children about money that they maybe think is because I think I'm right or because I'm just doing it in a loving way, but maybe there's more behind it. Have you got any stories about how you or other people or your clients actually navigate some of this stuff with money? Any examples we could?
I've got I've got quite a few. I mean, I've got one client who has been so generous with funding accounts for his kids.
Mhm.
Um, like really has just squirreled away like their ISAs and their pen. I mean, they're turning 18 and they've already got close to 70 or 80 grand in their pension pots because he's just been putting away little amounts every year for the last 15 odd years, and in their ISAs and things like that. So they've got a fantastic pot, and he's very level headed, etc., and he wants them to use that money to get a head start in life, for a property, for maybe further studying or whatever it is. But we haven't had the conversation yet when the child wants to start using the money, which I
Mm.
think is where, okay, is it going to be a source of friction when the child says, well, I want to go and spend it on this.
I'm going to go to Las Vegas and put it all on black, Dad.
Yeah. And so when they turn 18, the kids actually come in, and I have the financial advisor chat with, this money comes a lot of responsibility because, dad's,
That's that's an interesting word to be using. Why do you choose to give them that word with the money?
I think it's because of the fact that me and the client over the last few years have spoken quite a lot, and I think that's an important message for him to sort of relay. And I do agree that what we're trying to do with the kids is help them to appreciate that that this money isn't to go to Vegas with, like you said.
So it has strings attached.
Pardon?
The money has strings attached.
I think there is. I think that there would be the unwritten rule that this would be used for like an investment, or something that would improve. Now, when we say improve their life, we're talking about improve the number, right? As opposed to maybe improving the quality of life.
Well,
And
this
so that's a distinction that would need to be made. But I think without getting sort of hung up on what the potential outcome of that money would be, is I think that this person's just showed a very giving hand with putting money away for his kids, but at the same time has encouraged them to work and earn their own money and be sensible with saving and stuff like that. So I see him as quite a well-rounded individual when it comes to this, and that's one example.
let me just pause
Yeah,
there. And again, that does sound good. In every conventional measure, great.
yeah.
He's saved, his children got some money for study or whatever. So really good. And even in that example, to notice there's definitely an emphasis on words like sensible and responsible.
Yeah.
right? They're not bad words, but something's being transmitted with the money or with the gift. And we know in this work we're always interested in both sides of our
Mm,
humanity. And so, what seems to be transmitted, certainly through your telling of the story, is here's some money and it's
yeah.
given with love, and that's wonderful. And it's bound up with notions about the value of and the need to be sensible
Yeah.
and responsible. And sometimes one of the impacts of that sort of message, and by the way, we're all transmitting messages one way
Mm,
or the other. So I'm really not making a judgment of you or the client. We're all doing this all the time. But it's possible that those children will have to find their own relationship with the other side of being sensible and responsible. Maybe at times in their lives, is it easy for them to be irresponsible or reckless or frivolous or just go for stuff?
mm,
So we're always transmitting one value system or the other. And it's also possible that your client would want to reflect on that other side for themselves as well.
yeah.
Perhaps they've been being very sensible and responsible, squirreling money away, and what would it give their life now to be less responsible and just go and blow some money on something wonderful? So I use that as an example of it's always happening. We can't not be transmitting parts of our own unconscious process through
Mm.
money gifts, or if no money gifts, or any of these arrangements. Do you want to throw in a couple more examples?
Yeah, and that's so I've got, another client who seems to be not at the opposite end of the spectrum, but the pattern that I'm seeing is he's very free in supporting his kids with like years abroad and like going skiing for a season in Canada and stuff like that, and setting them up with accommodation and like the ski gear and all of that. And I think that that's, on one hand, that's beautiful to see, because there's a real like, I'm giving them that opportunity. But at the same time, I'm also wondering whether, are you're sacrificing maybe money for your own retirement because your number might not be looking as good as it could be. And so there's a bit,
Money on nice things for his children when they're
yeah, so there's also that, and so I wouldn't say there's a tension in that particular, but he's displaying an absolute like very giving, and supporting them in whatever they want to follow, which is also really nice. And heck, it's his money as well, so he's free to do what he wants with it. So two different sort of scenarios, but both parents that are trying to look after their kids and give them what they consider the best going forward.
as best they can, and in different ways. One may
Yeah,
be saving the money, one spending the money.
yeah,
And with both sides, different people listening to this right now might have different judgments. So some people might think, oh, that's wonderful to spend the money you have and give your kids great experiences. They get to see the world, they get to try different things. That's like an investment in their education as well as fun. And others, and you were a bit like this, might be, oh, but is his pot for the future going down? Of course, we've talked about detective work on this podcast. Any time I hear a story about another person or another parent, if I can catch it and notice it, it will raise things for me about my money story. So if I see another parent gives a gift, a big gift, or another parent says, no, no, you have to start paying rent by the time you're 12 or whatever, our judgments of that or what comes up for that always tell us more about our money story. And of course, I also want to acknowledge, as we often do, many, many parents will not have either of those choices.
yeah,
Many, many parents listening to this simply will not have discretionary money, savings, incomes, that even the question of do we do a ski season is an option, right?
yeah,
And many might be able to save a very small amount, perhaps long term, but not large amounts of money consistently. So, those parents too are also transmitting money behaviors just in a very different context. But one of the things we often say together is, what do I do with my life with and without money? And so we could say, as parents, you can transmit empowering, healthy messages to your children, whether or not you have lots of money. It's much more about how you relate to the money you have and relate to situations. I think that's more what we're
Yeah. And
fitting.
and I think the important sort of thing is with clients, which I have a sort of a privileged view, is that there
Mm.
will be some that will be maybe sacrificing for their kids, so sacrificing the things that they could do with the money for their kids' future, and that's okay, and they're happy doing that. And then I can also see where, certain parents might be sacrificing for their kids' future, and it could be in the form of private school and things like that. But it puts a real strain on the
Mm.
family, and I've seen this in quite a few clients. And my observation with that is that in the process of doing that, what are the kids picking up? Because kids can really
Yeah.
pick up on, you know, great, you're doing this, which is great. And but if it's putting you under a huge financial strain, what message is that giving to the kids? Which I've always sort of thought, that's
Yeah.
quite interesting.
Well, let's come on to that. Maybe let's dive into that now. And at the end of the podcast, perhaps we can reflect on how we are with our own kids, because I think
Yeah.
there's something to say there. I think you make a really important point. Let's summarize. We're living in a world of financial education that's pushing us towards the mainstream ways of thinking. We're then consciously trying to transmit different things to our children. But if we're honest, that's a lot about our own personalities or our own values. And a lot of that isn't all that conscious. Even if we think we're doing it for the best possible reasons and we think we're right, by definition, most people haven't really investigated our own attitudes to money. And finally, we're transmitting a great deal to our children without even noticing it. So the example you give of we're investing in your education, isn't that great? But there's a continual sense of strain, for
Mm.
example, or we both working every hour in jobs we don't really love, so we can do this wonderful thing for you. There's a lot of different messages in there. There's a lot of different messages. And it links to what we were talking about last week. If I'm not careful, I might be thinking I'm doing right by my kids because I'm working very hard to send them to whichever school. Again, huge assumption that paid for schools are actually better, but that's another question. But I might believe that they are. But there's an atmosphere in the house of strain or tension, or maybe I'm subtly guilt tripping. So when my kid doesn't do the homework, I remind him how much it's costing. Or we could be swimming in an atmosphere that I don't realize I'm transmitting. So I think I'm all about this message, but there's a whole load of other
Ah,
stuff going on. So this leads me to my two main things for parents to reflect on, right? And this is on the base of doing work with hundreds of people on this, and this topic comes up a lot. And also, like with our two-parter, hearing a lot about how people are influenced by their upbringing and also the questions they have as parents. So, suggestion number one, and this is a life-centered view of parenting and money. Suggestion number one is, hey, kids have their own path. They have their own karma, their own soul. They have their own stuff that they're going to find easy and difficult. So it's my belief, whether you call it spiritual or psychological or biological, children come into this world and they've already got stuff that they're here to learn or going to need to learn. And an example is my two kids. My two kids are totally different with money. One is a spender and one is a saver. They both wanted computers at a certain age. And one of them, we basically kind of got the computer and he had to pay us back, and it took him a year, and it was just through presents and money. And he needed a computer for school, but he wanted a gaming one. But one of it was buy now, pay later. And the other one had saved for a year or two before so he could buy the computer. Completely different, right? With the same parenting and the same
yeah.
content, different ages. I think children have their own personalities, their own shadows, their own blind spots. So the idea that I could make either of my children follow this path or that path with money or life, I think is unhelpful. And it
Mm.
comes back to what you said at the beginning, is how do I respect the individuality of each person? And what you and I have discussed in this podcast a lot is through money, we often get to investigate some of our biggest blind spots or the big important parts of us that we've got sort of tangled up, we're not relating to clearly. So my belief is that's true for children. And so you can give two children the same message and they will make totally different meanings out of it, or it will influence them very differently. We talked about this last week. You give the same message and one will grow up to be loyal to that message and follow it, and that will limit them. And their sibling will grow up to rebel against the message, and that will limit them. So generally, be careful if you think you can transmit anything really in a
Mm.
way that's going to shape them too much. Doesn't mean you can't offer, doesn't mean you
Yeah.
can't say what's worked for you, but I'd say always with the respect that they're on their unique journey. I've got one more I want to add, but shall I just pause there? What do you think of that from your own experience?
Yeah, look, that feels authentic in terms of what you said around, which is sort of where I had reached, but probably not fully comfortable with. Look, this is what's worked for me. This is what's on offer, and you might want to consider using this approach to managing your money. But there might be one that works better for you. That sits well with me because consciously I know that they're individuals and they're going to form different parts. And what you said about one being a saver, one being a spender, exactly with my client. And he reiterated, he goes, one of his kids, is always been, he says, just like me. And as in the dad is saying he was just like me, that, you know, saver, 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 and then buys what he wants. But, and the other one, a bit more reckless
Mhm.
and he was like, the same message has gone to both of them. But it's funny though that he, in our last meeting, he said that the older one is actually learning and now has started saving because something
Well,
has sort of clicked for him. So
yeah, but what I hear in there is dad has a value that sensible, good, reckless, bad,
right,
right? The one who was reckless is learning. So I think that's always the trick because both sides are helpful to us in life. So great that the older one's learning to save, but is the dad and the younger one learning to be a little bit more impulsive or a bit more reckless? That way we can all learn from and appreciate all the different ways of being that are in this family.
right.
The tricky thing is, again, if I impart my message and I think I'm right, but really it's reflecting a bias or a blind spot, if I'm not careful, I will make, let's say I've got two children, and one is, since the
Mm,
words are in the conversation, one is a bit more impulsive and reckless, and one is a bit more sensible and
mm,
responsible. What I want for my children is as they go through life, they can both have access to all of these qualities. So they can be sensible when they need to be sensible, and they can take a risk and just go for it when they need to. That's
okay,
going to be the most useful for them. But if
right,
I'm transmitting subtly that one way is good and one way is bad,
right.
I'm denying both of them. First of all, I'm denying them both the respect for how they are.
Mm-hmm,
So that's not a great message.
mm,
There's a little bit of shame or a little bit of rebellious, the one who's reckless. And I'm denying them both the opportunity to see that both of these are human qualities.
right. And that's really useful to sort of dissect a bit because as soon as you said, reckless is being bad, and immediately internally something was saying, yeah, being reckless is bad.
Right.
That's
Part of
my,
your unconscious system. Yeah.
and I would probably, if I was standing in the mosque and I went round to like, a dozen people and said, what do you think about being reckless? You know, I would probably, well, no, reckless isn't good, but I think, what you're saying is just so important to try and grasp and a really difficult thing to hold, that actually, being reckless at the right time and being whatever we said, the opposite, sensible, I think was the word, but being able to hold those two is going to
Yeah.
serve you a lot better. It's so hard to get away from the judgment of
Yeah.
reckless being bad because that's, I guess, in the modern, that's just seen as the more inferior quality, I think, or is that just me projecting onto it? I don't know.
Well, I think that's a great question.
Yeah.
I would think it look at different subcultures. Maybe in the culture of the professional mosque goer,
Mm,
it's better to be sensible, responsible, and underneath the word reckless might be impulsive or go for it or take lots of risk.
Right.
But in a different subculture, and being reckless and really going for stuff and not over analyzing and not over
Mm.
reflecting and following your impulse might be really great.
Yeah.
So I think it depends on the subculture, really.
Yeah. And yeah, again, just using one word can be a little bit
Yeah,
misleading as well.
that's
So
right. Well, what we always say in this work is below the word, the label, in this case, reckless, which sounds a bit judgmental,
yeah,
below is a human potential or a way of being that isn't a word, it's a way of being in life.
yeah,
And all of those ways of being are useful. And
mm,
our job as humans is to expand so we have access to as many of those ways of beings and integrate all of them. So I'm not ashamed of my sensible part, but I'm also not embarrassed about my reckless part. That's
mm,
what helps us go through life.
yeah,
Um,
that makes
which
perfect sense.
takes us on to the second point. The first point, as I say, is consider that children have their own path and their own uniqueness and things they're going to find hard and things they're going to find easy. And all of those qualities could be respected. And if I'm imposing a value system on them, even with love and good intention, that may be less healthy. So you asked me, I'm still on the first point here. You asked me what would be a better way for you to talk to your kids about budgeting. I would say briefly, ask some questions. Ask, hey, you know what? I really like to be organized with my money. How about you? Or how organized do you like to be? Or is it important to you? You could be asking curiously to try and understand how they make sense of this. And then when you understand how they see this, by the way, if you understand something about your children with money, you will be understanding something about your children in life. But if you're genuinely curious and you go, oh, that's interesting, and they might say something like, well, Daddy, it's not important to me. I just like to have fun with money, right? And you might go, oh, okay. How do we support you to have fun with your money? And one day you might decide you want to have fun and be in control or something. So there's a way to have a conversation. And I think the
Mm,
first step is don't assume you're right.
yeah,
Be really, really interested and respect in their kind of sacred reality that how anyone else makes sense of the world makes sense to them.
yeah, and that's so true. And not to go off on a tangent, and we're not
Mm.
going to discuss this, but I've been doing, as you know, some work on sort of Myers Briggs,
Mm.
which is like MBTI. If anyone wants to just go and Google MBTI or Chat GPT, you'll get a whole host. But it's, personality types, preferences. And when I've started to look at my kids through a lens of MBTI and how they see the world and how different things, they would approach different challenges or whatever, you start to understand the personality type and how they react in different situations. And so money is just, no different in terms of they're all going to interact with it differently for different reasons,
Okay.
and honoring and respecting that, I think is actually a beautiful thing, which will also, I think the key thing here is just take away any of the shame that gets put on to doing things a certain way, which I think is probably the most detrimental thing that you can do for kids, is
Yep.
layer them with shame because they're a certain way.
Yep.
So for anyone listening, as a parent, I think, approaching conversations with your kids as individuals and not trying to tar them with the same brush, so to speak, it's probably going to go a long way.
Yeah. And realize that any frustration or irritation you have about how someone is with money is at least 50% about your stuff. Let's go on to the second
Yeah,
point. And the second point is even more fundamental, which is I believe very strongly that the most important financial education you can give your kids is to do the work for yourself as an adult to live your own life as fully, freely, creatively, courageously as you can with and without money. What do I mean? Well, as you and I have explored many, many times, often we hold back, right? We limit ourselves, we get scared, we delay, we procrastinate, we stay in jobs that we don't want to do, we don't follow the dream, whether the dream is about work or other things, we don't create what we want to create. We suffer and we limit ourselves, and often we do it quote, to get money. Now, if you're doing that to any extent, and most of us are, whatever you tell your kids about money and however you organize money, the single most powerful message you are giving your kids for their life is the world is not a place where you can grow up and really follow your dream or follow what you want or be fully yourself. You're transmitting what you have to do is limit yourself and hold back and keep your head down because of this thing called money. And then hopefully, when you get your money right, you get to live your life. Okay. So the most powerful gift for any child is not actually having savings when they're 18, but if you can transmit to your kid by the time they're 18 that they really feel they can go off in the world and do stuff and learn and try and fail and just keep following their path, and that somehow they're transmitted, it will be okay whether you have lots of money or not a lot of money. But the world really is a place where you can follow your path. I would say that's the best possible investment you could make in a child, and it's the single biggest gift you could give them.
Wow, I feel like you've just dropped a heavy bomb in a good way.
Hopefully, it's a love bomb.
A love bomb.
Bomb of
You know
love.
what? So immediately, like when you're saying that, I'm thinking about like the decisions that my daughter, who's turning 17, is making around university choices, and she wants to go down sort of the finance accounting route, which is great. And in that line of financing accounting, that seems like a good route. And immediately, I think me and my wife are thinking along the lines of, yeah, with career in mind.
Of course.
And I'm sure because of our society and the way that we operate as a community, respectable profession, this, that, the other, and it could just well be that she loves accounting and finance, and that's totally fine. And if she wants to pursue that, I'm totally behind her. But I'm just going to go and use that open sort of questioning just around, well, is there anything else that you'd love to do? And almost find out is she going down the accountancy finance route because she believes that that's the right money path.
Yeah.
Because I think it would be great for her to, know that all options are available to her with and without money.
Yeah. And that's beautiful and a great conversation to have. And the more she or any child at any age sees that their parents really live as if all options are possible. Because remember, what you do will influence your child so much more than what you say,
Yeah.
right? So having the conversation is great and talking about their dreams. But if I'm a dad and I say, hey, follow your dreams, but they've seen me for 20 years not follow my dreams,
Yeah.
then what I've transmitted is my own fear and my own lack of courage and trust. And I'm saying this with love to anyone listening, including myself. We mustn't beat ourselves up for this. We don't need to judge ourselves for this. But maybe this is a call for anyone listening to think, wow, what would be the best model I could give my kids? Maybe that helps us take a risk or make a change or spend more of our money on what we really want now and believe in now rather than security in the future. Otherwise, what happens is we transmit the same story of a kind of fear-centered money path. We
Yeah.
transmit it through the way we live, and then our dear children will follow it, and they will get jobs for the money, not for
Mm.
life. And then if they're lucky at some point in their 20s, 30s, 40s, they too will go, oh, what am I doing here? So
Yeah.
this is how we transmit culture, actually.
Yeah. And I just wonder how many people have the conversation around, the career which is going to be the best for your money path. I think it's almost like ingrained
Yes.
in us. And this is what we've been saying all along on this show, is that we're conditioned that, money path comes first. And
Yes.
once I've sorted that out and I'm on a good trajectory and this, that, the other, then I get to do the life path. So should we wrap up with like
I
a
think
couple of key takeaways? I mean, we've spoken about things that I might do, but
yeah,
any
yeah.
that you would suggest?
For me, this has been kind of very rich, and maybe there's another follow-up conversation in a different form. I would say anyone listening to this, either with children or working with the children. I would say a couple of things. One thing I didn't mention today, I was reflecting on me and my own kids, and I don't think I do anything particularly interesting or special around money with my kids. But one thing I do is I make all money discussable. I try and not have it as a taboo. So if they ask me what I earned last year, I tell them. If they ask me what my car's worth, not a lot, I tell them. If they ask me what a holiday costs, I tell them. Right? So I don't tell them what things cost, but I don't hide it. I wait. If they're interested, I'll treat it like any other question. So I would say one thing we can start doing as parents is just make money a topic that you can discuss and you can talk about, but not with the edge, not like, do you see how much money I'm spending? Or, oh, you must never talk about it. Just if they ask me a question about a number, I'll tell them the number. So that might be one thing for people to reflect on is we start to remove some of the charge around money by just making it something we talk about. That would be one. And then I think the other thing would be for people to really reflect on as parents, if it's true that my children will be influenced in their money and their life more by what I do and how I live than anything I say, what could be one step I take in my life to really model what I'd love my kids to see more of? I think that would be a great reflection.
Yeah, that's a great couple of things that people can do and put into practice. That's a great place to end, Tim.
Great.
I'll see you next time.
Thanks, Shabba. See you next week.